Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining the Association of Language Companies today for a webinar discussing the annual Conference Advocacy Day on Capitol Hill. My name is Jessica, and I am the Association Coordinator for ALC, and I'll be today's moderator. For today's webinar, we have Bill Rivers, the Executive Director of JNCL NCLS, Patrick Holross, General Counsel of Coalition to Promote Independent Entrepreneurs, and Trey Calvin, the Managing Policy Analyst at JNCL NCLIS. For today's webinar, please be aware that all participant lines will be mute during the webinar to provide the best sound quality. If you have any questions or any technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat feature, as it will be moderated throughout the webinar. Each presenter will then answer questions at the end of their presentation. Alrighty, guys, I think we're ready to get started.
Yeah.
Hey there, this is Trey Calvin. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, excellent. Just want to put this in presentation mode. I know I've met some of you guys. I see there's a lot of people on the call today. Thank you so much for taking some time on Thursday afternoon to get ready to speak up for languages. A lot of you may have been here in the past. If this is your first time at an advocacy day, this is your crash course. We're going to go through all the different layers of what to expect. But first I get into all the nitty-gritty details. I want to just talk about what we're doing today. Talk a little bit at the beginning about what is JNCL Nicholas, what we do, and the coalitions that we're a part of. Then we want to pass it over to Patrick Holross to tell us a little bit about the background and the present situation of harmonizing the definition of employee. I'm going to turn it over then to our Executive Director, Bill Rivers, talk about language industry specific legislative asks. And then I'll round it off at the very end with a little bit of a rundown of what the meetings should look like, what you should expect, and how to get to and from Capitol Hill. So again, we've already seen this. You've seen our pretty faces. Let's move on to the main portion of our event today. So the Joint National Committee for Languages, JNCL, is our 501c3 promoting the idea that languages matter for national security, economic growth, and social justice. We do the policy planning and recommendations for our over 130 members. And when we take those policy planning and recommendations to Capitol Hill, we do that under the aegis of NCLIS, the National Council for Languages and International Studies, which is our 501c4, which means that Bill and I are both registered federal lobbyists asking for specific legislation, rules, and regulations. We are a nonpartisan group. That's why we call ourselves America's Language Lobbyists. We're language lobbyists for all. Our mission is very simple, and it's supported by our vision. We just want to ensure that Americans have the opportunity to learn English and at least one other language. That starts as soon as possible and goes throughout the lifetime. We like to say we speak language policy here at JNCL to those in power. These are some pictures that I'll show you throughout the webinar about some of the meetings that we've had, but we are your headquarters in Washington, D.C. We have a bunch of industry partners. Over the years, we've been getting more and more. A lot of you I see are on the call today, so thank you for joining us. And we're always looking to grow our industry partners. Our coalitions are very diverse. We're a big tent 501c3 and NC4. We're part of the language access movement. We lead, actually I'm the secretary on the National English Learners Roundtable, promoting bilingual and dual language education. We're also part of a larger group called America's Languages Working Group, which is about raising public awareness and the funding levels of high quality K through 20 language programs throughout the United States. And then finally, especially this is particularly of interest to our industry coalition, we are part of the coalition to promote independent entrepreneurs. And at this point, I want to pass it on to Patrick. I think Jess might have to unmute Patrick. And that's pretty much what Jay and CL Nicholas is all about. And if we can get Patrick on the line.
Well, thank you, Trey. Can everyone hear me?
I can.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank Bill, Trey, and Jessica for the opportunity to present today. Again, my name is Patrick Holra, and I'm with the Coalition to Promote Independent Entrepreneurs. And just briefly, this is a group of companies, associations, and individuals, all with the shared goal of protecting an individual's right to be self-employed and a company's right to do business with self-employed entrepreneurs. And the big program that we're working on right now is harmonizing the definition of the term employee at the federal level and at the state level. So most of my presentation today is going to be on the federal project, but before we get to that, I just want to give you a brief update on our state project. Last week we had a victory in the state of Arkansas. Arkansas, for unemployment purposes, had what was called this ABC test. You might be familiar with this test if you've been following the Dynamex case out in California. The ABC test, that's a three-part test. Well, the Arkansas unemployment statute has been amended. It now applies what's called this common law test, a test that's more objective and should be easier to satisfy. So I tell you, if any of you do business in Arkansas, I tell you, things should be looking better for you going forward. Also want to just let you know, we're actively pursuing the similar bill in Tennessee and Oklahoma, and we expect bills to be enacted within the next few weeks. So that's Arkansas has been enacted, and we expect Tennessee and Oklahoma very soon. Now moving to today's topic in preparation for your advocacy day next week, I want to talk to you about the project to harmonize the definition of employee for purposes of federal statutes. And the way this would be accomplished would be adopting what's known as this common law test to define the term employee for purposes of the Fair Labor Standards Act. And I'll briefly mention later on, why we're focusing on really just that one statute. But before we get into that, so here's just some background on the current lay of the land today. Right now, there are more than 10 different tests defining who is an employee, who is an independent contractor for purposes of federal and state statutes. So there are different tests defining the term for purposes of different statutes, different parts of the same statute, and even the same statute in different jurisdictions. This creates substantial uncertainty for you in operating your business. There could be a situation where an individual is an independent contractor relative to your business for some purposes, but an employee for others. And that's just no way to operate a business. Now, focusing just at the federal level, there are three predominant tests. The first test is this common law test. I'll refer to this throughout the presentation. This is the test that applies for federal tax purposes, the Affordable Care Act, ERISA. Most federal statutes apply this common law test. The second test is what's called this economic realities test. As we'll discuss later on, this is a bit of an outlier, and it applies primarily for purposes of the Fair Labor Standards Act and a few other statutes that adopt the FLSA's definitions. Then there's this third test, which is called a hybrid test. As the name suggests, this is actually a combination of the economic realities test and a combination of the common law test. And we propose harmonizing around the common law test because really that's the only way to achieve harmonization. Most federal statutes already apply this common law test, so we want to bring in those few other statutes that don't apply that test into conformity with the others. And then, as we'll discuss a little later on, the easiest way to do that is really just amending the Fair Labor Standards Act. That one act can have the effect of harmonizing all federal statutes. It would eliminate the economic realities test for purposes of the FLSA, but also for those other statutes that adopt the FLSA's definition. And then the statutes that apply that hybrid test, when there's no longer an economic realities test, there'd really be nothing left to be a hybrid of, so those tests would essentially fall out of favor as well. And next slide, please, Trey. And so, really we're at this point where we have this harmonized test, but it might be helpful to you to understand, why would this be beneficial to your business? Why would harmonize around this common law test be the way to go, other than just being practical? Well, first, creating this one harmonized test would increase the certainty of your business relationships, that an individual who's deemed to be an independent contractor for one purposes will likely be deemed an independent contractor for others. And this common law test is a more objective test than the others. So that also increases the chances that your business would be able to establish these independent contractor relationships. At the same time, eliminating this economic realities test would also be very helpful. As I mentioned earlier, this economic realities test, this is primarily an issue with the Fair Labor Standards Act. So the Fair Labor Standards Act, what exactly is that? Well, that's the federal statute that prescribes minimum wage and overtime requirements. It also has a very prescriptive record-keeping requirements. So an individual, a company that has independent contractors, those independent contractors are outside of the FLSA's purview. If you have employees, you have to comply with these minimum wage, overtime, and record-keeping requirements. Well, right now, this economic realities test applies. And this, because of the factors, they tend to be very subjective and often are beyond a company's control. It can be very difficult for service-based industries like yours to satisfy this test. So this federal harmonization project would not only increase the certainty by having one test, but it would harmonize around a test that would be better for your business and easier for your business to qualify. Next slide, please. And to give you an idea of how we arrived at this situation, I thought it'd be helpful to give you some of the relevant history, and also through this process, touch on some of the legal foundations that support this harmonized definition around the common law test. So to begin, we really need to go back to the New Deal era, to the 1930s in the aftermath of the Great Depression. It was around that time that President Roosevelt enacted the National Labor Relations Act, the Social Security Act, and the Fair Labor Standards Act. The Supreme Court has categorized these statutes as of the same general character. They all, their purposes were relatively similar, to provide benefits to individuals to help them get back on their feet after the Depression. Now, courts very early on, really immediately after the enactment of these statutes, applied this common law test to determine who's an employee, who's an independent contractor for these purposes. There was some disagreement, and eventually the U.S. Supreme Court decided the matter. The first matter was in a case concerning the National Labor Relations Act, and the Supreme Court adopted this economic realities test. Next slide, please. Based on that National Labor Relations Act case, that's this Hearst case, the Supreme Court also adopted the economic realities test for purposes of the Social Security Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act. So there was a point in time where all three statutes first applied a common law test, then because of the Supreme Court decisions, applied this economic realities test. But Congress reacted negatively to those Supreme Court decisions. Congress amended the National Labor Relations Act and the Social Security Act to adopt a common law test. In effect, Congress overruled that NLRA decision, and that really should have had an effect on the FLSA as well, because the FLSA case was really predicated on this Hearst case, the NLRA case, which Congress essentially overruled. Unfortunately, that did not happen. So then you had this split, some statutes following the common law test, some following this economic realities test. But hopefully for us, more recently, this was the late 80s into the early 2000s, the U.S. Supreme Court again considered the definition of the term employee in this stance concerning the Copyright Act and ERISA. and in those cases held that a common law test should apply for purposes of these statutes. Now, here's what really helps our case. ERISA and the Fair Labor Standards Act contain the identical definition for the term employee, and both statutes are administered by DOL. So this case right here, this more recent ERISA case, it really supports that harmonizing around the common law test, in a sense, is just codifying more recent U.S. Supreme Court decisions. Next slide, please. So really, one of the goals at your Advocacy Day next week is urging members of Congress to amend the Fair Labor Standards Act to adopt this common law test. In a sense, codify these more recent U.S. Supreme Court decisions. And some background on this legislative approach, last Congress, this was in 2017, a bill was introduced that would have done just this: amend the Fair Labor Standards Act to adopt the common law test. That bill was introduced by Diane Black from Tennessee and Elise Stefanik from New York. And we now know that Elise Stefanik, she has agreed to reintroduce the bill this Congress. And so the goal would be to urge members of Congress to consider co-sponsoring that bill when it is introduced, and that will be sometime soon. Representative Diane Black is no longer in Congress, so this is something that Representative Stefanik is leading. So just to kind of recap very quickly here, the idea is to harmonize the definition of the term employee for federal statutes around this common law test and increase the certainty for your businesses that independent contractor relationships will be respected. And that ends my prepared remarks, and I'd be happy to answer any questions in the time I have remaining.
Please feel free to use the chat feature to get any questions over to Patrick. We'll hang on for a minute or two to see if anybody puts some questions through.
Oh, absolutely.
Alrighty, guys. Oh, it looks like we just got one question or one comment, just like thank you for all the information.
Oh, my pleasure.
Oh, and we now have another question. It says, is the bill bipartisan?
The bill in the last Congress was not bipartisan. Republican sponsor, Republican co-sponsor, but that was it. Now the bill right now, the idea would be to have a bipartisan bill. So Representative Stefanik, she's a Republican, but through the coalition, we have been working with Democrat offices, meeting with them in hopes of having a Democrat's initial co-sponsor, so the bill would be bipartisan. I can tell you, we view this as a bipartisan issue. Now, sometimes the politics muddy that up, but we do look at this as a bipartisan issue.
Okay, wonderful. We have gotten another question. It says, can you please summarize the features of the economics reality test?
So the economic realities test, right now, that's a 7-factor test. And to see all 7 factors as opposed to just reading them off to you, I'd recommend going on the Department of Labor's website. You can see all them listed. But big picture, some of the requirements, for instance, an individual's investment in their business. Well, that's a factor that, like, especially for a service-based industry, could lead to the wrong decision. Some businesses don't need a significant investment, whereas, say, some of these other industries, say like a trucking company, well, the individual buys a truck, okay, there's a big investment. Some of the independent contractors you work with might not have a big investment, so that counts against you. The longevity of the relationship, another factor. Well, if an individual likes the opportunities that you have, why should that count against them for continuing to do business with you as opposed to a competitor who might not have the right opportunities they're looking for? So some of the factors are more subjective that, and again, are beyond your control, really don't get at, are you really in an employee independent contractor relationship? By contrast to the common law test, that's all focused on control, much more objective. You, the company, pretty much have complete control over whether you satisfy that test. Do you tell the individual what to do, control how they do that, as opposed to, does the individual have a website and promote himself to other people? maybe yes, maybe no, but it's beyond your control. That's why we really think this common law test is a better metric of independent contractor relationships as opposed to this economic reality test, which again is a more subjective test than currently a 7-factor test.
Alrighty, wonderful. Well, thank you, Patrick. It looks like that rounds up all of our questions.
Oh, my pleasure. And best of luck at your advocacy day next week.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, we want to thank Patrick so much for taking some time. He's going to hop off the call now, and I want to introduce our Executive Director, Bill Rivers, who will be leading us to the Hill. Bill's going to tell us a little bit about the language industry background, obviously, that you're very familiar with, and then jump into our asks. Bill?
Great, thanks. Of the Coalition for Independent Entrepreneurs.
Start over.
All right, so I have to start over again. But thanks very much to Patrick for coming on and talking us through some of the complex issues. I'm always amazed at how something that seems so straightforward, which independent contractor versus employee, can be defined in 10 different ways, each of them leading to potentially different outcomes. And that's before we take into account, 56 states and territories. But I wanted also to have Patrick on as an indication of the kind of coalition building that we work on, and that everyone coming to Washington and everyone involved with Jan Seal Nicholas benefits from. I'm just, when you come to DC, you're telling, and when you go to Capitol Hill, you're exercising your First Amendment rights to petition the government for redress of grievances. You're coming to tell your story and to ask your elected officials to do something on your behalf. And our story is a great story. Whether you follow the NIMSY numbers, the Common Sense Advisory numbers, we're a $50 billion a year industry plus. And that's not counting all the sectors, language teaching, for example, public and private sector. Doesn't count public sector direct spending. Estimates of 250,000 professionals in the industry, another 150,000 teachers. It touches every sector of the economy. There are 400,000 remote interpreting events roughly per day. That's 150 million a year, and that's growing. So it's something that, and I say this all the time, how much I enjoy being in this industry, how amazing it is, how dynamic it is, how I've watched it grow over the last 20 to 30 years. But that's the story we have to tell. We have to get your Congress people, our Congress people, senators to say, hey, wait a minute, this really matters. This matters for economic growth, for national security, for social justice, and we deserve their help. Okay, next slide. So we all know this, that this comes back here to, and I talk about this all the time. I got into the industry 30 years ago because I spoke Russian and I was an engineering major. I said, hey, you speak 2 languages. You can be an interpreter, right? And it's way more than that. We know that being in this industry requires a whole range of different skill sets. If you're a linguist, you're a translator, an interpreter, you need subject knowledge, you need skills, you need language. And that applies to the business side, that, we know there's a talent gap. And that's part of why we're so deeply involved with the ALC Bridge. Next slide. Our top markets reflect demographics of the U.S. That probably holds for pretty much every major knowledge industry market. The big high density, high population states with big economies tend to have the major the major returns, and certainly because we do so much work for limited English proficient individuals, that also reflects that. We estimate roughly half a billion dollars in contracting for language professionals from the Department of Defense. And then finally, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, as we all know, keeps saying, interpreting and translation is going to be one of the high demand growth areas going forward. These are the reason I'm reiterating this stuff to folks who already know this information, because not everyone on the Hill is going to know this. We're an invisible industry. We're like the oil in your car. You don't think about it. Now, if you're smart, you're checking it every time you put your gas in. You're changing it according to the owner's manual, but a lot of people don't do that, and then the engine seizes up or there's some other problem, right? Where we do our job well, we're often invisible. Interpreters, in fact, are taught to fade into the background, right? So we need to make our role visible on Capitol Hill. Next slide. So what are we asking for? And we'll do a bit of a deep dive into all these topics. Enforcement of proper contracting procedures for knowledge-based services. We want to assess the prevailing wages and the Bureau of Labor Statistics methodology. This comes back to that we're one of the top growing professions. Unfortunately, the language industry pays, according to the Department of Labor, pays $46,000 a year. That's not very appetizing. And then we want fair enforcement of the Service Contracting Act. Next slide. So employee classification, we've talked a lot about this. We're supporting the Coalition for Independent Entrepreneurship and asking Congress to reintroduce the Harmonization of Coverage Act and support Representative Stefanik. And so this really comes down to, can we get to a clear path to compliance at a national level for employee classification? What we want to avoid, and the ALC has been working on this, I think since its inception, since Bill Graper and others founded the ALC, we want to avoid states basically coming after our industry and looking at language companies as a revenue source for their unemployment insurance funds. Okay, next slide. We went through this in some detail, and I know a lot of you are on the ALC California Task Force. Dynamex, the case Dynamex versus Superior Court of Los Angeles. Dynamex is a sort of a last mile delivery company, a trucking company that in the early aughts decided everybody was going to be everyone who was an employee, all their drivers would be on a Friday, they come to work on Monday. They're now independent contractors, driving the same trucks, wearing the same uniforms, with the same routes and so on. Pretty clear violation of the spirit and the letter of California's laws. It winds its way through the courts until last year, when the Supreme Court of California rules that the old ABC test, which so-called Borrello rules, the B criterion being either the work that the independent contractor was doing was outside the normal place of business or the normal line of business, would be restricted to outside the normal line of business. And that makes it very hard, if you're a language company in California, to have independent contractors who are doing language work. It also makes it hard if you're, say, a film production company in California, having independent contractors doing film production work, and so on and so forth. We're really trying to push back on this and saying what we want is a clear path of compliance. We want to return to the previous rules in California and let industries sort out their own labor models. We're also making a rhetorical point, and maybe even a substantive point, that language work isn't the gig economy. It shouldn't be seen in the same way as Uber or Lyft versus the taxi cab companies. Although Lord knows Uber provides a really good service, and that's not even a plug for Uber. But that what we do is knowledge based. That we're part of the knowledge industry, not so much the gig economy. And if that comes up in your meetings, you can reinforce that, saying, "Look, what we provide is a high-tech, high-touch service to professional service that, as we've mentioned, touches every part of the economy in every state and every location." Next slide. LPTA versus best value. Now, we're going to do a deep dive into federal contracting for everybody who sells into the federal space. God bless you. I did it for 15 years. LPTA means lowest price technically acceptable. And in 2017 and 2018, there were provisions inserted into the National Defense Authorization Acts that first restricted the ability of the Department of Defense to use lowest price bidding for knowledge-based services, and then the whole US government. They're supposed to use the trade-off model as opposed to LPTA or reverse auctions, which are even worse than lowest price, in my personal view. Language services require professional skill set. This is knowledge-based work. This is not a commodity. What we want to do is sort of two issues here. One is that we want the Congress to make sure that this is being enforced. And the second is that when we're in a service contracting mode, if the Service Contracting Act is invoked, then the government is required to use prevailing wage rates as determined by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That was created in the late 1960s in order to create a floor below which the government could not pay. So the government couldn't use its massive pricing power to lower the wages of Americans working on government contracts. But if you combine the service contracting, which uses prevailing wage rates, with the lowest price bidding methods, then frankly, you're crazy if you're bidding a rate above the prevailing wage. And the prevailing wage is the median, the midpoint wage as determined by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Those numbers come in at $23 an hour for all interpreters and translators nationwide, regardless of location or language or field or modality, with $4 an hour of benefits. We know that's well below what the average rates come in for all of our industry surveys. It doesn't align with the actual conditions, and we're concerned the methodology may be flawed. The Bureau of Labor Statistics doesn't have a large enough sample to accurately represent the language industry, and that they're not sampling 1099s, they're sampling employees. So our actions on LPTA versus best value. I know this gets very complex because these issues are closely tied together. We want the data. We want so the Armed Services Committee, we want them to report on the use of the LPTA versus trade-off and other contracting approaches for the procurement of language services. And we want the General, I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice a bit. The General Services Administration also to report on this for the procurement of language services. That's LPTA versus best value. And you're going to get this again on the 1st. So if you're not catching it all, we'll come back and repeat it. Spiral learning and all that. All right, next slide. Oops. Back up. Prevailing wages. And so we will be asking as well for the Congress to ask the Bureau of Labor Statistics to justify its methodology on prevailing wages. And now I think we're ready for questions.
Alrighty, everyone, if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat box and we'll happily get them answered. Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any questions right now, but if you do happen to come across anything that you need asked, feel free to throw it in the chat and we'll get it answered at the end of the presentation.
All right, everybody. Trey Calvin back again. Thanks, Bill, for taking us through a deep dive of those issues. As Bill mentioned before, we will have one-pagers not only to help you with your talking points when you're sitting across from either a member or a staffer in the congressional office, but also to help them understand the ideas that we're expressing in the asks that we're going to be soliciting in Congress when we get there next week. So Bill touched on this just for a moment. I think we all sort of forget this sometimes, but the First Amendment gives us the right to come to the government for redress of grievances. We can petition them for things that we want in Congress, and this is why we go there. We're exercising our First Amendment right. And your role in this is very unique. I can't tell you, especially for states that are more towards the middle of the country that are harder to get to from Washington, D.C. I'll tell you, give you a good example. We had a couple members from Montana come to a lobby day back in February. And they, at first I'm sorry, I'm getting an echo. Sorry. At first, the staffers in the office were like, oh, do you have a meeting? They said, yes, we do have a meeting. And so they set them down and they started a conversation, and they realized they were from down the street from where they used to go to high school. And suddenly the whole tenor of the office changed. They were so excited to see a fellow Montanan in that office that they opened up all the doors for the red carpet was rolled out. They got to meet Jon Tester. And so your presence in their offices is a really exciting opportunity for them to connect with you because you're a constituent. Now, on top of that, you're telling your story from an expert point of view. Now, in some situations, we might not all know Bureau of Labor Statistics, prevailing wages, all the deep dive stuff that Bill is talking about and what Patrick was touching on. But you are on the front lines of business every single day, and that's what they really want to hear. So when I think of telling your story, you want to think about what's your elevator pitch, which includes who you are, where you're from, how you got involved in the industry, and how you're affecting your immediate community as well as the global markets. As Bill said, we're 51 billion years strong. It depends on what numbers you want to use, but I'd say that's a pretty strong industry that, like the oil in your car, you might not think about every day, but it does get you from point A to point B. So I want to talk about the logistics. I think a lot of people get a little nervous about getting around Capitol Hill. It is a hill, as the name would imply. And so we're just going to talk about where every building is and what buildings you'll be going to, as well as how to get there from the Omni Showroom, which is where most of our meetings during the morning will take place. And then we're going to talk a little about the weather forecast for that day, so you know what to pack the day of, as well as what your attire should be, what's appropriate. So let me just zoom in just a little bit closer. Oh, sorry, I'm doing the wrong way. Oh gosh, oh, I'm sorry. It's my only time to get a laugh during one of these. So if you can see here, we're zooming in on Capitol Hill. The Capitol complex is in the center of your screen. And on the north side of the hill, we have our Senate offices, Russell there. And on our south side, we'll have Rayburn, Longworth, and Cannon. The way that we design our meetings is for you to stay with your state first. So the way that you will be organized on May 1 is by your state delegation. Now, it makes sense to start with the Senate offices, since you'll already be in groups, and then you'll be moving on to the House offices, because even if you're in the same state, you may be paired with a different representative of the state. Sorry, just going to switch here. So as you can see, Senate's on the north, House offices on the south side. Now, when you're walking from the House to the Senate side, you want to give yourself about 10 to 15 minutes to cross through the, I wouldn't call it a swamp area, but by the time May comes around, it will be pretty hot. But just give yourself 10 to 15 minutes to get from one side of the hill to the other. So as I mentioned, your first meetings will most likely be on the Senate side, and you will stick with your state delegation. You will be given a paper copy of your schedule for what meetings you're going to attend. This schedule will include your name, your state delegation that you're with, the exact location of the office where you're meeting, as well as a contact phone number and email of the staffer, just in case you get lost or in case you're running late. And then, of course, it'll have the time as well as the people that you will be attending that meeting with, so you can have like a accountability buddy system. You look around, you say, "Where's Jerry?" Because he's missing or something. You'll be able to see that. And then the House meetings will vary depending on your district, but that'll come later on in the afternoon. So there's really two ways to physically get to Capitol Hill from where we're at. Omni Showroom is about 3 miles outside of Capitol Hill. It's within DC, and it's actually pretty close. If you're taking a ride share, and I heard Bill plug Uber a second ago, but if you're taking Uber or Lyft or a taxi, you want to give yourself about 25 minutes of travel time. It's pretty simple. If you're sharing this with several people, it's a really low cost way to get around, especially if you're splitting the cost. Now, if you're a little more adventurous, and maybe you're a veteran of DC, you're familiar with the metro system, this is, I would say, a much easier way to get around, and it really immerses yourself in DC culture. So the way that you would do this, if you're not a veteran, is purchase a Smart Trip card at the Metro. So the Metro that we would go to is called Woodley Park and the Adams Morgan Station. It is part of the Red Line, and it is about a 4-minute walk from the Omni Showroom. So you'll walk from the Omni Showroom to Woodley Park, part of the Red Line, and you'll get on going towards Glenmont. And then it's about 14 stops straight to Union.
14 minutes, 6 stops.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Bill. Bill's done this plenty of times. He knows. I actually mixed up my numbers. It's 6 stops and 14 minutes. So if you look at the taxi versus Metro, you're getting there a little faster if you're going underground. So once you get to Union Station, you'll be able to see on our map here, it's on the northern part of the Capitol Hill area. Now, from Union Station to get to your Senate offices, that'll take you about 5 minutes of walking. It'll be a nice day. Get to the weather in just a moment, but it's pretty simple to get around once you get off at Union Station. Now, I want to mention this. One of the lessons that we've learned in the past is that sometimes people that are attending on the Hill, that are advocating for languages, they may have misplaced a handout or a folder or something or another. So our staff is going to be located at the Dirksen South Buffet. Essentially, this is a large cafeteria area where you can go and dine throughout the day. We will be located there as our home base, and I'll provide you my cell phone number and email so that you'll be able to contact us in the case that you misplaced a folder, or maybe you need an extra couple of handouts. We will be there to assist you on the Hill. That'll be our home base. Now the weather. I keep hearing that our administration is draining the swamp. Well, nothing's happening about the weather in DC. It is continually hot. Right now we're sort of brisk, but when it comes to next week, we're looking at a high of 84, low of 57. It's going to be very windy, gusts of up to 23 miles an hour, and essentially 1 percentage point away of humidity from actually raining. So what I would suggest in terms of attire is it's muggy. I would definitely wear an undershirt to catch that extra sweat if you're walking around from your Senate side to the House side. And it'd probably be a good idea to carry a small cotton handkerchief like I do around to wipe the sweat off the brow. And I would say this, comfortable shoes are definitely a must. I know that we want to look formal, so I will leave this to your discretion. It's certainly not required for women to wear heels or men to wear big cowboy boots or something. But I would suggest comfortable shoes in the case that you're walking from Senate to House side. The business attire, or the attire for this day, is business. So for men, we're thinking slacks, tie, suit, sports coat. Similarly for women, blouse or skirt or dress, since it's going to be very humid out. And if you do have a light blazer, that'll also go well on Capitol Hill. But just think business attire. If you have any questions specifically about what to wear, or you have any doubts at all, please let me know. I put in a couple pictures to give you an idea of what the meeting will look like. So here's a meeting that we did back in February I believe this is Mark Warner's office, where we're talking with a couple that's Allison Reed from the Linguistic Society of America, executive director, who's basically using her teacher voice on the education staffer there and telling this legislative director, here are our priorities. And you can see that each one of those participants have their one-pagers and talking points out on the desk so that they can chime in when they need to. And the staffer also has that in front of her so that she can see where we're at. And the meeting flows really, really smoothly around those talking points. So to go through the little things about the meetings, there's some do's and there's some definitely don'ts. Here's a couple of definitely don'ts. Someone who is just talking and talking and talking, sort of like I'm doing right now, but just remember that it's not your show unless you're an individual. You'll probably be with a group. Make sure that everybody has a chance to talk, including the staffer or member of Congress. We are trying to have a conversation. That's not to say that our asks aren't the most important thing on the table. They definitely are. But we do want to get a sense of where the staffer is coming from. They may give you some political insights into why they can or cannot support the bill. And that you can relay to us so that we can then follow up with them and figure out, okay, what's a better angle to come at the staffer or member of Congress in order to grease the wheels, as it were, and to make this easier for them to co-sponsor or sign on to. The fast talker. Sometimes, we get a little ahead of ourselves. That speaks for itself, I think. Being too familiar or too angry is also sort of a don't. We want to treat these people with respect. I mean, the staffers and members of Congress on Capitol Hill are some of the smartest people that you'll meet, and they deal with things that none of us have time to deal with. So they're really just looking for that, bottom line number, your story, and how this legislation may fit into their overall agenda. So we want to approach this as a respectful meeting, especially if this is your first time, to establish that relationship going forward. And then what to actually expect. So depending on the size of your group, you should plan for a 10 to 15 minute meeting. I will tell you that on Wednesday morning, we will be at the Omni Showroom, and there will be about, I'd say 30, 45 minutes for you and your state delegations to practice what a meeting will sound like and look like. And here's some basic one-by-one, step-by-step bullet points for you to follow. So the first couple is, understanding what your elevator pitch is and being able to get down to the nitty-gritty quickly. So introducing yourself, giving and taking business cards. A lot of us have business cards. If you do not, we always make sure to put one of JNCL Nicholas's business cards in the folder that you're going to leave behind. So there is never no one's ever dropping the ball in communication here. One of the first things you got to do is distribute the folder. You saw from our meeting here that everyone has their folders out and ready so that we can follow along together. You want to start the conversation off as well, asking the staffer or member how familiar they are with the language industry. And in a way that I usually like to do this is I like to say, oh, so what's your language? It may not be surprising to you that a lot of civil servants on Capitol Hill are quite well educated and probably have taken language in the past. So it's a really good common starting point to move from. What did you take in high school? Did you continue into college? Did you study abroad? That kind of thing. And then going back to the elevator pitch, once you get to your talking points, try to relate why this legislation and the asks that we're bringing to the offices would affect your community locally as well as globally. If you're in a big group, you want to make sure that beforehand that morning on Wednesday you're talking about who's going to try to lead, if you're all going to talk one by one, etc. There's just some other general tips that we'll include in the PowerPoint for you to view later. I think I've touched on some of these too. The one that I really want to point out is for the most of us that have been to Capitol Hill, and I've never really had a problem with this, but you want to stick to the message and don't assume politics. We're coming up on 2020, as you guys are very well aware, and it's easy to get bogged down in that. And we'll save that for the cocktail hour on Wednesday evening. But while we're here, we really love to emphasize the fact that languages are bipartisan. Republicans and Democrats can come together and have in the past come together around our legislative asks. So we really want to emphasize that while we're there. And of course, if you don't know an answer to a question, it's okay. That's why Bill and I are here, to be your policy experts and to follow up with the staffers afterwards. And then one more thing, sometimes, especially during the busy season, which is coming up in May before the big August recess, is meetings might be cut short. Maybe there will be last minute changes, or sometimes it's in a hallway. This happens sometimes. There's more people, lobbyists on the Hill than just JNCL Nicholas. So just to keep that in mind and keep your expectations tempered. But overall, when we get in with the offices, we tend to see members, and this collage here is to remind you to take pictures. This is if you didn't take a picture, it never happened. Top left-hand side, you see Chris Van Hollen there, Senator of Maryland, Joe Manchin in the middle, West Virginia, and so these and the rest are some staffers from different offices, including Florida. They're just really great ways to show your business community back home or your members on social media that you are actively taking an effort to exercise your First Amendment right, and that you're on the forefront of advocacy. And it's a really great thing to use for your business moving forward. And of course, following up, make sure to get their business card as well. We'll have a thank you note template that you'll be able to send. We'd like you to send that from your email so that personal touch is there. You also copy me so that I'm involved in all the communications in case they have any follow-up questions. And then one of the things that we forget is that, members have state and district offices that are fully staffed there too, and they come back quite often. You could also reach out to them to visit your site. It should say site, not school. We do this with a lot of educators as well, but there's also that opportunity since they're so close to home to you. And at this point, I will open it up for questions. And Jess, if you'll let me know if there's anything there, that'd be great. Otherwise, we might be wrapping it up.
Yeah, it looks like we have one question that came through, but I'm not sure if it's for you, Trey. Can you please let me know if anybody or whom from ALC is scheduling the Hill meetings?
I bet this is Susie Dumont Perez. She had, I think we have been in email correspondence before. So JNCL is taking care of all the meetings on the Hill right now. I'm looking over at Alyssa Rutkowski, who is currently glued to 2 screens right now and is constantly updating our schedules for over, almost 100 people. But yeah, so we, as JNCL, it's a service to the ALC. We're reaching out to our contacts and making sure that those meetings are with the appropriate either staffer or get the member of Congress in there.
Okay, wonderful. It looks like we have another question. Thank you, Trey. This was a great overview. What is the chance that the staffer we met in August are the same staffers we are meeting next week?
There's a very good chance. Yeah. Oh, sorry to cut you off.
Okay. I was reading my thank you notes from August and was wondering if I should try to reach out to some of those folks and give them a heads up that I'm attending.
That's an absolutely wonderful idea. We, because of the way that legislative offices on the Hill is set up, a staffer will have a particular set of issues, their legislative portfolio, and sometimes turnover on the Hill can be, I wouldn't say high, but it happens that these young people are moving around. But most likely you will be meeting with that same person. So it's always a good idea to reach out and say, hey, just want to let you know I'll be on Wednesday. JNC, the Joint National Committee for Languages, is scheduling my meeting. I hope I see you there. So yeah, excellent idea. I love that personal touch.
Okay, wonderful. What time do we start?
That's a great question. So if you look on your agenda, it's on the app and it's also on alcus.org site. The schedule starts on Wednesday, I think around 8:30. And then we're going to be doing trainings up until around 11:30 to noon. It's important to note, however, that because of different meeting times on the Hill and when people can actually move in, your meetings may start as early as 11:30. In that case, we will let you know well beforehand at the beginning of the day when you get your individual meeting sheet, and so that you'll be able to leave a little bit early to make that meeting. All the the nitty gritty in terms of the deep dives into the talking points and the legislative asks, we're going to do right up front, right at the beginning of the day. Towards the end, like 10:30, 11, we'll be doing a recap of what I just talked about with logistics, and also to give your team a little bit of a chance to practice together. So to answer your question, it could be as early as 11:30, but we've tried to schedule all of our meetings after 12 and before 5 o'clock.
Alrighty, this is from an actual ALC staff member, and it said, can we get a copy of action slides to post on the conference app?
Sure thing. Yeah, we certainly can. I'll adapt some of these, especially the ones from Patrick and Bill, to make sure that it's condensed and concise.
Oh, wonderful. We really appreciate that.
Oh, yeah.
Looks like our last question comes from Indy, and he says, I'm still not sure if I'm going to do this or not. How do we know who else is going from our state?
That's a great question. So one of the things that we've done in the past, Indy, is we have shared a Google Sheet that everyone can take a look at. And that way you'll be able to see some of your tentative meetings. If we're still waiting on to hear back from someone, or we're trying to confirm a time, you'll be able to see that, but you'll also be able to see who's from your state. We hope to have that ready by late Friday or early Monday morning. I would err on early Monday morning, so that you'll be able to see. But I'm going to I'm looking at Alyssa right now and seeing if by Friday we could get that out. I don't see any reason why we couldn't share that by tomorrow. So if you do see a couple of pending meetings on there, do not be alarmed, but we'll certainly share that with you. I'll use that as a follow-up point. Thank you for the question.
Alrighty, everyone. If you have any more questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box.
Well, yeah, nope.
Alrighty, we got one more question. This is from Susan. She says, I was so afraid to go in August, but I have to tell you it was so beneficial, and I know each of us made a difference. Plus, if you do not want to go alone, let us know and we may be able to pair you with somebody. Trey, do you agree?
Do I agree? It's Susan. Of course I agree. Susan is one of our killer advocates. I remember from August, I don't know, she said she was a little timid. I don't think she really is. She had a great time, and I think that the staffers really enjoyed her perspective. I think that they listen to people who are approachable. They listen to people that are like them, and they listen to people that are serious about the issues. And I think that all of us have those qualities in common. And the only thing that we it's easy to be intimidated by the halls of power. It's easy to be intimidated by the marble and the statues. But remembering that the person on the other side of the table is really there to listen to you as a constituent, and realizing that you are the expert in this particular area is very empowering for, I think, for a lot of our advocates to realize. So yeah, I always get butterflies in my stomach before we go into Hill meetings, but it's part of the excitement. It's part of what makes this a unique event. And it's part of why, people come back and do this year after year. So thanks for that question, Susan. I would completely agree with you.
Alrighty, guys. Well, at this time, it looks like we don't have any more questions. If you haven't already registered for the annual conference, or you know somebody who could be interested in benefiting from the different sessions in the ALC Advocacy Day, please feel free to register them. All the information is on our site, alcus.org. If you would like to see this presentation in its recording, or you have any additional questions, please feel free to email myself at info@alcus.org, or as you can see on the screen, Trey's information is there if you have any additional questions that weren't answered during the presentation. So at this time, I think we're gonna close out our presentation. Again, please feel free to email Trey or myself, and we look forward to seeing you at the conference.
Thank you so much, Jess. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And we look forward to next Wednesday. Have a great weekend.